And today, a perspective on the relationship with the college and the government. And it's a relationship that's necessary and at times has been fruitful and at other times maybe not. But for a perspective on that relationship, we're fortunate today to be with Rollie Thornhill, who many know as a politician from our past in Nova Scotia. His involvement on many boards, including the board of Cape Breton University, and also from his involvement with the Gaelic College. Welcome this afternoon.
Thank you.
And thanks for your part in the 75 years of history.
I wasn't here for 75 years.
Okay. For those who don't know, let's get a sense of where you came from first. I'm aware that you have a history in your career in broadcasting. Where did that begin?
Well, no, I didn't have a career in broadcasting, although someone from your mother corporation approached me one time.
Okay, that was it.
And offered me a job at the CBC, and unfortunately I didn't take it. Otherwise I would be successful like you are.
Oh, well.
Would have made much more money. But no, I was born in Newfoundland, and came to Nova Scotia when I finished high school. Went to university at Dalhousie, and following that I started a career in the investment business. I was a stockbroker. And I lived in Dartmouth. During that period of time, I became involved in the political life of the community. Eventually, I became mayor and a member of the Nova Scotia legislature, so that's really the background.
Now, what was the attraction for you of the political life?
Well, to some extent, Rodney's there, and I look at him, and he, of course, is the prime example of success in this field. But it was very, I was involved in the Junior Chamber of Commerce in Dartmouth, and I was president, and there was a municipal election, and some of the boys in the organization, it was all male in those days, looked at me and said, "You should run for alderman." And I said, "Well, heck, I just got off the boat. I mean, I just got here. I don't know anybody in this town." They said, "Well, that doesn't matter because most people are here that way. It was a new community." So anyway, I ran for alderman, and I got elected. And I was very interested in what was happening and as part of the Junior Chamber of Commerce, we ran the tourism department for the city. Mm-hmm. It was our responsibility. So I became quite interested in tourism, and eventually, of course, when I was in government, I was appointed as one of my portfolios was Minister of Tourism, and it was really one of the ones that I enjoyed most.
Now, at what point did you know that the career in politics was for you?
Well, it's one of those things, Ian, that once you get into it, it's a heck of a lot harder to get out of it. There were times when I said, I've done this, been there, got the scars, got the t-shirt, and maybe it's time to move on. But then the leader of the party or whatever the situation comes along and says, "Well, look, that'll send the wrong message if you resign at this time or if you leave." And, eventually you get in there, and I spent 32 years there altogether, from the time I was elected alderman until I retired.
And right from the beginning, your interest was in the field of tourism. What was the attraction to that particular portfolio?
Well, my strong interest was in the field of economic development, and I felt that tourism was an extremely important component of economic development in Nova Scotia. And the reason was because during my time as mayor of Dartmouth is when we started the Burnside Industrial Park. And that turned out to be quite an economic development achievement, and and made a major change in the whole complexion of the community. And when I went into government, the premier of the day asked me if I would take over the development portfolio, which I did, and subsequently I became Minister of Tourism after spending 8 years. But I think tourism, we have to remember, is a very important part of the trade component of the Nova Scotian economy. And it consists mostly of small business. And what I liked about it is trying to understand what it is that attracts people to an area. Sometimes we get the idea that what attracts people to an area is the mountains and the beaches and that sort of thing, golf courses, you name it. I was never of that ilk. I know that those things were quite important, but I always had the feeling that you had to market your edge. You had, because the new tourist is no longer mom and pop in the car coming from Boston or New York. It might as well be, could be a retired couple in a motor coach, or it could be a yuppie man and wife, or girlfriend, boyfriend, no kids. And remember, to go from Boston, you can go from Boston to Bermuda, or New York to Bermuda, or to the Caribbean, almost as cheaply as you can come to Cape Breton. So you have to market what you consider to be your edge. So what is the edge? What is the edge that Cape Breton has? And to me, it's the people and the culture. That's what makes it different. You see, you look at the ads that the Newfoundland government is promoting at the present time, and compare those to ads that are being done, say, in Nova Scotia or any other place. And they're magnificent. I mean, they just make you want to get on that ferry boat, and go over and see the place. But what are they marketing?
Yes.
Their marketing is the last frontier, the people. People that have been living there for 400 years, and they have a culture and a uniqueness that is theirs, that is individually theirs. And we have that in Cape Breton. And that's what makes this place so important, because it's the culture and the identity of the people is what you have to market.
Yes.
Because if you do that, people can come here and have an experience that they will remember for a long time, and they will talk about it when they go home, and the word spreads, and you get people here. And you see with the entertainment and the cultural entertainment that we have in this region, I mean, it's very important. So I've always felt, and tried to get this going, and I still would like to see it happen. I could see Cape Breton setting up a basic cultural center, very similar to what they did in Stratford, or what they've done out in Banff, where you have the high technology, in keeping with Bell, in the arts. And this place would be a very integral part of it, as would the Highland Village. And people would come here, you would utilize the talent, it would be year-round, and they would have an experience coming to Cape Breton just as much as they would have if they went to Stratford or if they went to Banff or any of those places. And I think that if what would we be building on? We would be marketing the thing that makes us different from anybody else, and that is ourselves and our culture.
Now, that you feel is our edge. As you worked with the bureaucracy and your colleagues, how close were they to your point of view in agreeing on what is our edge?
Not a heck of a lot, because they are still of the ilk, that if you build a marina, people will come. And if you build a golf course, that's going to bring people. Well, there are more golf courses in the world today than there were bowling alleys a few years ago. There's one practically now. It's all right for rich guys like you, but but they're not. I think the emphasis we have to Those things are very important. I mean, you've got to have those kind of facilities. And we've spent a lot of money on facilities in Nova Scotia in the last number of years, and I admire that because I think it's an indication of our faith in the future. But you have to be cautious and realize that it doesn't matter what kind of facilities you're building if people don't come. You know? So how do you bring people here? And that's where the culture and the salesmanship and the marketing comes in. And I wouldn't, you know, if I was selling Nova Scotia today, and that's what I would sell. That's the marketing that I would do and emphasize.
Now, when you were in politics for a while, as you mentioned, you had the opportunity to become Nova Scotia's Minister of Tourism. How much personal responsibility did you assume for marketing of Nova Scotia?
Well, I was somewhat involved in, you know, I had to take responsibility for really everything they did. But I would have a number of intimate discussions with various bureaucrats within the department, and sometimes our views did not coincide. And as happens so often in politics, you don't get as much done as you'd like to. I often tell this story, maybe I can tell you this one. When I retired from politics, I met a fellow on the street in Dartmouth one time, and he asked me, he said, how are you doing? He says, in your retirement? Well, I said, you know, I got into this business when I was 24 years old. And I said, when I came in, I was all gung-ho, and I said I had all the answers. And then sometime during that 32 years, some of those answers escaped me. But I must say that after I got out, it wasn't long before they all came back. So I can look at the thing from being there, from a perspective, and this is no different. For example, the last thing that I was responsible for in my time as Minister of Tourism was the construction of this building that you're going to be talking with Eveline McLeod in the next couple of days. And Eveline, when I first came to Dartmouth, or came to Cape Breton, I would meet Eveline McLeod at church. And she would always come to me, and she would say, we need a new building at the college. This is the outside of the church. We need a new building. Yes, Eveline, what kind of a building, you know, and so I'd talk to her. That's fine. Next time I'd come down, I figured she'd forget about this. Eveline would grab me again. Finally, Bonnie said to me, she said, Rollie, you might as well get that building built because she'll never leave you alone. So I picked up the phone and I called my friend Elmer McKay, who was Minister of what they call Regional Economic Expansion or something. He was responsible for that at the time. And he apparently is a relative of Eveline's. So I said, I've got a cousin of yours down here that's driving me absolutely crazy, and she wants us to sign an agreement so that we could share federally and provincially in the construction of a new building on the Gaelic College. And I said, knowing Eveline, I told her to call you so she won't leave you alone any more than she's left me alone. So shortly after that, we did sign an official, we put our bureaucrats on it, and they put together a program. We signed an agreement, of course, here. But the reason I did this is because I recognized then, as I recognize now, the importance of this institution. I mean, what we were just talking about, the culture and the intrigue of this, I mean, it manifests itself here and in Highland Village, in places like that. I mean, that is where you get the real experience of the Nova Scotia culture. You don't get it out on the golf course at Bell Bay. You get it by coming here, you get it by going to the theater tonight.
Yes.
And seeing the local people put on a play on Black Cove, you know. Place is sold out. People want to go to that.
Well, where were you in your career when you first became acquainted with this place?
Well, mostly from that lady there in the white. Bonnie, of course, had a very strong sense of this place and what it meant to the community and what it meant to Nova Scotia. And we discussed it quite frequently together. And then I received an invitation when I was minister from New Zealand. And they wanted me to come over on New Year's Day and officially open their summer games at Waipu.
What year was this?
This was in 1989. I came back in 90, but it was
Yes.
that year, the end of the year, 1989. And so I thought about it, and I accepted the invitation, and I took Bonnie with me at our expense, and then we went over. And I was absolutely flabbergasted and fascinated with the people of New Zealand and their contact and their feeling for this place. It's when we formed that twinning society, the Waipu St. Anne's Bedeck Twinning Society. I've got to here in Bonnie book. I don't know if you'd like me to. Maybe this might fill a bit of time here.
Well, yeah, to help us get a sense of that relationship and its importance.
This is very brief, but this is what I said on that occasion. And this is, as Jim St. Clair would say, listen, 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 and think of yourself as being out on the field in Waipu on a beautiful summer day, January the 1st, 1990. And here's what I said. I bring you greetings from the province and the people of Nova Scotia on the Atlantic coast of Canada to our friends in New Zealand. There is a singular warmth in our expression of goodwill. We are renewing the friendship which began with the long voyage from the east coast of Canada around the Cape of Good Hope and across the Indian Ocean to Australia and then to New Zealand. When the Reverend Norman MacLeod and his close-knit group settled here, it was a migration and achievement to be remembered with pride by succeeding generations in New Zealand and in Nova Scotia. They sailed in 1851 from St. Anne's, where the Cape Breton Highlands rise above the North Atlantic shore, bound for the other side of the globe, with determination to build a new life in a new land with unshakable faith in God and his servant Norman. The Highland blood flows strong and true in the descendants of those courageous people who set out across a wide, wide sea. Their story of adventure and the building of lives in a new land has been told and retold by the firesides of Nova Scotian families and children of each generation since the 1850s, have learned of their people's strength of character and religious faith. Our ties with the descendants of those who settled here from Cape Breton remain strong, as is our love for the Highlands tradition that remains a part of our Nova Scotia heritage. Coming from New Scotland, where traditions of old Scotia are strong in our heritage, these Highland Games are also a homecoming. This event allows us the privilege as well of welcoming a new decade, a day earlier than at home, where the snowy fields are still bright with the winter sunshine of the 31st of December. The twinning of Waipu, New Zealand with St. Anne's, Bedeck and Cape Breton, the island jewel of our province, is formal recognition of the links of family and heritage between our two lands. These ties have endured a century and a half between Nova Scotia and this green land washed by the Pacific and the Tasman Sea. In Neil Robinson's book, The Lion of Scotland, he describes Scottish settlers in the North Island as men of the forest and the sports field. We are privileged to attend the Highland Games which are held wherever people of Scots descent make their homes. Hard physical labor toughened men of the forest for the competitions of life, and those qualities which they brought to the playing field made them strong of mind and heart. 10,000, this long voyage made by our great-great-uncle Murdoch Macaulay to join his lady in New Zealand brings to mind the words of Robbie Burns in his poem, A Red, Red Rose, and I will come again, my love, though it were 10,000 miles. 10,000 miles or more from the shores of Cape Breton to Waipu in New Zealand, a journey measured now not in months but in hours, but still a reunion of the heart, and from all people of the province of Nova Scotia, the warm hand of fellowship to the people of Waipu. So that gives you some sense of the relationship between the groups there.
And that, as I listened, I was thinking, yes, you should have said yes to the CBC. When you reflect on that that re-meeting of with people in a foreign land with whom we have so much in common, how significant an event is that in the history of this college?
Well, I think it's very integral to the whole thing. I mean, it was here. It was this is where he was, and when A.W.R. Mackenzie started the Gaelic College, he was brought here because of his inspiration and how he was totally enraptured with the memory of the Reverend Norman. And I mean, that's such an important part of our history. And you know, that migration story is really one of the great migration stories of all time. I mean, it started in Scotland, went to Pictou to St. Anne's, St. Anne's to Australia, Australia back to New Zealand. And I'm told, I think I'm correct on this, Bonnie, that on that trip in 1851, they never lost a person. No one died on that voyage. I mean, when you think of it now, it's a little different than crossing the Atlantic. Because when you cross the Atlantic coming from Scotland to Nova Scotia, that can be a pretty rough trip in January. But once you get out of here after 3 or 4 days, you're in the Bermuda waters, so you're pretty well in tropical country, pretty well all the way through. And they would stop in South Africa and get fresh vegetables and that sort of thing, which no way you can do that if you're leaving Ireland or Scotland to come to Nova Scotia.
It's one thing to go to a place and visit and renew the relationship. It's another thing to take the step of twinning and agreeing to continue the relationship. What went into that?
Well, the people of New Zealand were very anxious, as were we, but they really had the strong initiative. That was really one of the reasons they had invited me over there, is because they wanted to do this, and we wanted to do it, and we set up a trust immediately, and there were students that were coming from New Zealand over here and spent some time here in the summer months. So when we came back from New Zealand with the concept of forming the Twinning Society, we held a meeting here at the Gaelic College over at the Hall of the Clans. And I think it was in February or March we had that meeting. And there were about 200 people there that showed up from around this community that came to that particular meeting because they wanted to be part of that, you know? And that's the interest that was there. So as a result of, I mean, there are many, many people, I don't know if there are any here now for this 75th anniversary, but there were a lot of people from New Zealand who have come. We've made contacts and they've made contact with us. And quite often we're getting emails or we get people arrive at the door and they say, you know, we're from Waipu or we're from there, and My grandfather or great-grandfather was a Morrison from Boldry, and can you take us and show us where he lived? You know, that sort of thing. We get a lot of that, and so there's still great communication between the people of New Zealand. I mean, they still consider themselves. They call themselves Novies. If have you ever been to Waipu?
I have not.
Well, you know, the museum that's there is a museum of history of this connection, you know, between Nova Scotia. And it's the flag of, when you get there, the flag that's flying at the over the museum is not the flag of New Zealand, it's the flag of Nova Scotia. And they refer to themselves as Novies. And if you go to the cemetery, I mean, you think you're in Boldry. You know, you look at all the names, there's the Macauleys, there's the McLeods, there's the Morrisons, you know, all the same names that from here, people that left here.
I hear they even have 2 guest books when you arrive at their tourist information building. One for people from Nova Scotia or Cape Breton,
Yeah.
and one for the rest of the world.
Yeah. That's right. I remember one time Betty, what's Betty's last name? Powell. Betty Powell. She was a fantastic person. And she ran that museum for years. She knew more about Cape Breton than we did. I mean, she really did. She knew everyone. So, we had an agent general. Oh, let me put it this way. She was over here, and it was around Thanksgiving. And Jim St. Clair called me at the house. He wondered if Bonnie and I would like to go over to Port Hood Island on Thanksgiving afternoon. They were having a special service in that church over there.
Yes.
And we'd go over on the ferry. And he wanted to know if we wanted to go. And so we said, yes, we would. And I said, but we have a guest here, Betty Powell from New Zealand. And is it all right if we go? Absolutely. So we all went over we did the thing and came back and dinner, that sort of thing. Anyway, we had an agent general in London. His name was Donald. You remember him, Ron, you probably heard of him. Donald M. Smith. And Donald was one of the Smiths from
Port Hood
Island.
Island. Yes.
You know, Dr. Sidney Smith, who was the president of the University of Toronto, he was from there. They're quite a formidable family and all very successful. But Donald was sort of deaf, eh? And when he spoke to you, he said, "Hey, what's that?" You know? And he'd been in England, and he was our agent general over there, and he retired. So he decided he was going to take a trip to New Zealand before he came home. And he went into the museum, and Betty Powell was there. And she said, "And where are you from, Mr. Smith?" Donald says, "I'm from a place that I'm sure you never heard about." And she said, "Where would that be?" He said, "Port Hood Island." Well, she said, "I happened to be at a church service there on Thanksgiving with Rollie Thornhill and his wife and Jim St. Clair." So poor old Donald, when he came back to Nova Scotia, he couldn't wait to call me and tell me that story.
Once the twinning had taken place and you continued your work with the Department of Tourism, how prominent would the Gaelic College be in your planning and your marketing? What was the significance of this place?
Well, to me, it was a very, very important institution, and I thought that then. I think it now. I think it should be supported and encouraged, because for reasons that I've outlined beforehand. This institution and its relationship with government, as you said at the beginning, has been very good, and at times has been very bad. Some of the history, going back over a number of years, a very rocky road, you know, but that's not unusual for a Scottish institution, you know, because Scots do know how to, you know, the old clans, they sometimes didn't love each other, you know.
It happens.
And so that sometimes this sort of thing does happen, but this place is set up, we have a board of governors. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but let's use this the way it used to be, and I think it's close to it now. There were, say, 14 members of the Board of Governors, 7 were appointed by the governor and council from the province of Nova Scotia, and the other 7 were appointed from within the board and in the community and the county, that sort of thing. And they were given a grant from the province of Nova Scotia. I think the last year I was there was about $250,000 a year, or something like that. 250, 300,000. And the college ran its own affairs. There was not a lot of involvement by the government itself in the direct operation of its affairs, and I think rightly so. You allow an institution to govern itself, and we always had good, competent people on the board, as we do today, and they were given the responsibility of managing the place. And the government only became involved when there became some very serious disputes. Now, we would collaborate through the bureaucracy with the director of this institution in our advertising programs and things of that nature, but as far as the day-to-day government of this institution, it was fairly autonomous, and there was not a lot of government intervention in the day-to-day operation. That's got nothing to say with the overall concept of what tourism is all about and what our cultural development is all about, but in the day-to-day operation, it was left to the institution to do its own governing.
You mentioned that government would become involved if there was a dispute of some kind. Do you have an example in mind that comes to mind?
I don't, because there was none when I was there.
Well, good. Good.
But some of my predecessors have told me some horror stories, some of which I won't even repeat. But I remember the mayor of Port Hawkesbury, Billy Joe. At one time, he was minister responsible for cultural affairs, and at that time, the Gaelic College was not under the Department of Tourism; it was under the Department of Cultural Affairs.
Okay.
Recreation and Cultural Affairs, I think it was called. Anyway, but Billy Joe was and he told me that he spent more time here at the Gaelic College that year than he did anywhere else in the province of Nova Scotia, and there was a dispute. There was I don't recall exactly what it was about, but you know that as I say, the nature of the Scot is that you're not to expect smooth sailing on all occasions.
When you reflect on the place of the Gaelic College and the priorities of the province, sometimes I'm sure a higher priority than others. What's influenced the good times for the Gaelic College? What's been taking place in our society when the Gaelic College would rise in prominence?
Well, I think to a great extent, and again it goes back to the culture. You look at the importance of this particular institution about the time of Celtic colours. Now, if there's one example of cultural tourism that works, you don't need to look any further than Celtic colours. Celtic colours is a remarkable success story. But this institution plays a very integral part. It's center stage for everything that's going on at that place. So, I mean, that's one prime example of how important it is to the cultural development of the whole area.
After you had completed much of your life in politics, the prominence of the Gaelic language itself was given some recognition here in Nova Scotia. As an observer, what do you believe has been the impact of that?
I don't know. As a matter of fact, it's too bad Kenny's not here, because he would have a much greater sense of that, I think, than I would. And it is unfortunate that he wasn't able to come. He's not feeling.
He's ailing. Yes.
He's not feeling well at the present time, and he's had some health issues recently, which made it impossible for him to come. But he has a good sense of that. And I recall first when he came into the legislature, he was sitting in opposition, and he would stand up and say a few words in Gaelic and that sort of thing. But you know, you look at Katrina Parsons, and we talked to her quite frequently, and I mean, the Gaelic language is almost been brought to life. You were here the other night at dinner and up there on the program. I mean, it's you know, this again is part of the culture. Keep it going, keep it alive, and this is one of the institutions that can do it, and that's what's going to bring people here. You know, that's the experience that they will remember, is coming into the Gaelic College and listening to that language being spoken and the lilt of it and the songs and all of that sort of thing, and watching the milling products. And, you know, these really should not be underestimated, the value.
When you are representing tourist interests in your past role, I know that part of the job means you need to work with your colleagues in government to remind them of the important priorities that you look after. In making the case for the Gaelic College, what would you tell your colleagues about its significance, its importance?
Yeah, well, I would tell them pretty well what I've told you here today. And you see, when I was Minister of Economic Development, I was responsible for all of these federal provincial agreements. They were all signed and initiated through, as a result, you know, our department was responsible for that. So we were dealing quite frequently with the feds, and that's why we were able to do this here. And quite often we would, you know, I understood at that time, and still do, and I think others, I'm sure that Rodney did when he was there, recognized and understood the importance of that industry to the province of Nova Scotia. I mean, there's no other industry where small business is as prominent as the tourism. You know, everybody is an entrepreneur and a small business person. Now, you run into, you know, we have to acknowledge when you're talking about tourism, one of our greatest enemies is the weather. You know, how do you keep a place going 12 months of the year? And it's very difficult to you know, run an operation profitably on 6 months' revenue. And that's why you see a number of these operations fail. And I think that's where we've got to start placing a great deal of our emphasis. That's why I mentioned something about the development of the year-round cultural institution that would, you know, that would take in the whole island. It's something that would keep something going on a year-round basis. And I think, you know, we have to acknowledge that. And it's very difficult if you own a hotel, you've got a big debt, and you have to pay that over a 12-month period, but you're only getting revenue for 6 months. You know, it's tough to operate.
I'm thinking about the many opportunities for a provincial government to influence what happens here. And you've referred to this as being in the field of economic development, also in the area of tourism. It's a place where people learn, so it's also in the area of education. What are the chances that the relationship of the Gaelic College with the province of Nova Scotia has been influenced by that sometimes split focus?
Well, I think actually the province over the years, regardless of which government was in power, has always had an understanding, sometimes maybe a little more benign than it should be, but I think they have all had an understanding of the importance of this institution. You see, one of the things when you're a minister in a government of a province as varied as Nova Scotia, you know, you're dealing from Yarmouth to Mead Cove, and all places in between. And so that there is always a great demand. You see, one of the problems sometimes that we have is parochialism, okay? If, for example, we got going, someone took the leadership and we started to develop a major center for the arts in Cape Breton Island, the next debate would be, where's it going to be? Okay? You know, is it going to be in Mabou? Or is it going to be in Sydney? Is it going to be in Port Hawkesbury? And there is the old idea sometimes that if some community gets something, the other community will suffer. And that is absolute and total nonsense. And we've got to get rid of that concept of parochialism, not only in Cape Breton, but in Nova Scotia. Like, for example, the ferry system, and I'm not being political on this, but the ferry system in Yarmouth was extremely important to the tourism industry in Nova Scotia, right here in Cape Breton, and should not have been abandoned, you know? It's a very, very important link to a very major market, the United States of America, 300 million people, all of whom, many of whom, love to travel.
In cars.
In cars. So we have to sometimes, Cape Breton has something which is quite different from anywhere else. Now, for example, again, we're the city of Halifax, I understand, the other day have hired consultants, paying them about $50,000 in order to identify themselves. Okay? Identify themselves. Now that's something that Cape Bretoners have never had to do. You know, we know what our identity is. We've been here for 400 years. And the identity is the people and the culture. And so that's what we've got to be marketing. That's where we are.
And as you consider the future, and especially the future of the Gaelic College, you've mentioned the importance of marketing the people and the culture, our edge. You've mentioned the importance of considering extending our tourism year. What else should we think about to make sure that there will be another 75 years for the Gaelic College?
Well, again, we have to market. We have to market our age. And marketing is extremely important. And we've got Rodney and the others who are responsible for this today should try and find out what agency is handling that Newfoundland stuff. Because that's what we've got to do. We've got to market that edge which we have. And if we do that, you see, there are mournful Scots all over North America who are pining for their backgrounds and their heritage, wanting to hear of the lilt of the pipes and know about the Highlands and that sort of thing. Properly marketed, you know, a place like this, a place like the Highland Village, you could have Campbell's and McDonald's lined up at the causeway trying to get in. You know, that's what we've got to do.
What is the feeling you get when you see the marketing from Newfoundland?
Oh, I want to go home. You know, it's beautiful. Bonnie and I were there last summer in a bed and breakfast, old Captain Thornhill's house in Grand Bank, where I was born. And I was sitting on the veranda and I was reading a book there, and this car pulled up, and a woman and her husband walked in, and you know, you're sitting around there, like your friendly, say hello, and you folks had Newfoundland license plates on it, so I thought there was somewhere in St. John. So I said, "Where are you folks from?" She says, "Kelowna, British Columbia." They'd flown in, of course, and rented a car. Well, I said, "What would bring you to Grand Bank in Newfoundland from Kelowna?" She said, "The ads." The ads, you know, and it emphasized to me the importance of advertising and advertising properly. But you've got to advertise your edge. You know, there's no point, you can have all the golf courses in the world, you can build all the marinas in the world, and if people aren't coming, you know, you've got to bring them here. And the competition is stiff. It's just as cheap, as I said, to go to the Caribbean from Boston as it is to come to Nova Scotia. You know, the competition is tough, but it's there, and people are there. They want it. They want to. You know, we have to take advantage of what we have.
I want to invite our guests to ask questions of Mr. Thornhill, but just one more from me. On a personal level, what has the Gaelic College meant in your life? What sort of an impact has it made?
Well, I've had a great attachment for the Gaelic College, and I must confess, to a great extent, it's because of my wife Bonnie. She has always spoken. I mean, before we moved back to Cape Breton, when we were in Dartmouth, and she has always spoken of this place, and I've always tried to read as much as I could, and I was fascinated with the Norman MacLeod story, because I always thought that was one of the great migration stories of the world. And so to me, it's a place that depicts, it's Cape Breton, you know. It's here because it identifies what Cape Breton is, and that's why it's so important to maintain it.
Thank you for that.
Who has a question?
I would ask you, would you think the Gaelic College has a future as an arts cultural center? The potential for developing this, not only for the Gaelic culture, but as a world-class arts cultural center and market it as a...
I think it does. I think Cape Breton cries for that kind of a facility. Now, this may be a part of a campus of the whole concept, but a very integral part of it all. And I think that if somebody takes a hold of that concept and can sell it, that's going to be the savior for tourism and cultural development.
I agree as well. This is only my second year here, but I've lived on the island now for 19 years. And the grounds, the infrastructure is here ready to sort of develop it into something else, side by side with the Gaelic culture, because it is the center of Cape Breton. It's it is
very accessible.
Accessible. So, like you said, other communities will benefit from it. So
Very much.
that's great.
Yes.
Yes, Rollie, you mentioned earlier on, and it's been said, I'm sure, many times, that small business is very much the employer in Nova Scotia as well as here. And I'm wondering where you would see the impetus would come to develop something like that, because, you know, is it grassroots and from the small businesses, people who are at present trying to make a go of it? Where does how do you get that going, and how do you develop that? It's a marvelous idea, but how do you get the buy-in and the impetus to really get it?
Well,
going?
Shirley, it comes back to leadership. Somebody has to lead. I think the concept is one that is readily saleable, but it needs someone to take it and run with it. And usually that's the community. That's where the community comes in. Because I can tell you, for example, I mentioned earlier about Dartmouth, the Burnside Industrial Park. I can tell you how that got established. We formed a committee of business people, small business people, in the Dartmouth area. And I called it the Dartmouth Business Commission. And we had a couple of public meetings, and we talked about how we're going to redevelop this place, how we're going to get her moving, you know, because there's always good competition between Halifax and Dartmouth back in those days. And we wanted to be our own thing, do our own thing. And the concept was established that what we really should have is an industrial park. And you know, that land came up for sale, and because that commission and committee and the public had been involved in it, that piece of land came up for sale, and do you know what it cost? You may be surprised when I tell you. We bought that land for $90,000, the Burnside Industrial Park. And there were some people that were negative about it in council, you know, when we came through with the concept to buy it. But generally speaking, it wasn't difficult because the idea didn't come from the council down, it came from the people up. And that's why the community is so important. That's why the community is so important to this institution. If you don't have the community support, you might as well fold your tent, like the Arabs, and silently steal away. Because you have to have the community support. You have to bring them in, involve them, make them part of it. Don't just bring them in to tell them what you're doing. Bring them in and ask them, what should we be doing?
So the communications.
It's communication. It's communications and it's leadership.
Question over here?
More of a statement. I don't think you're aware that people born in Cape Breton have a device in our feet. It's a homing device. It's filled with pictures, conversations, joyous times, music particularly. No matter how far we go, every once in a while that thing is triggered and we want to come back. And I believe ancestrally, that's in all the people who have had family here over the years, and that's where we can get it. If we can trigger those little homing devices periodically, even for a short while, that'll bring them home.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Any more questions or thoughts for Mr. Thornhill?
Well, thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you very much, Roland. I enjoyed that very much. Good job. Rollie Thornhill.